Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Fast and Furry-Ous. And with me today are two, well, I don't want to say furries, so we'll just say, I don't know, the Coyote and Roadrunner. My two good friends, Manny Cruz and Matt Hunter. Say hi!
Meep, meep.
Hey, perfect timing. That is chef's kiss right there. So, to start it off, let me just mention a few things. So, first of all, yes, Fast and Furry-Ous released on the 17th of September 1949. It had a blue ribbon reissue sometime in 1957. It's the 567th in the series and it's directed by the great Chuck Jones. This short, very easy to see. I can't show it to you here because of copyright, but you can find it on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 1, the Platinum Collection Volume 1, and on HBO Max, all in various states of restoration, which we can discuss later as well. Synopsis, I mean, do I really need to give a synopsis? I mean, all the Roadrunners are the same, but I'm just going to say it anyway. The Coyote's hungry, he wants the Roadrunner, we see a series of gags, and that's basically it. But hey, it's more exciting than the way I've just made it sound right then.
Yeah, but there is more to it.
Yes,
there is much more to it.
So buckle up and we're going to get right into it. So the trivia. I'm going to get the most obvious one out of the way. This is the very first Roadrunner and Coyote short, and thank goodness, because this is one of my favorite Looney Tunes series of all time, because even in later years, when Chuck Jones made a few afterwards, even they were pretty good, despite the other Looney Tunes stuff not being as good. So I'm very happy to finally be at this point. So, as with most characters created by Chuck Jones, now the character designs are not quite what they would end up being, but you know what? They're actually very, very close. Like, for example, the Coyote looks much more thinner in this particular short compared to his later appearances. But again, I'm going to do a Simpsons reference here. I know Manny will appreciate this. It's like season 1 of The Simpsons. They're still The Simpsons, but they're not quite what they would end up being. So there you go.
Interesting.
There you go. That Clover Road gag, which we will discuss in more detail later because it's got some fascinating stuff about music on it, that people, especially in LA and in various parts of urban America, would have found this, gotten a kick out of this rather, because at this point, more and more people are buying cars. So instead of using public transportation, so they'll build up all these highways and freeways, and a lot of them, especially in LA, would be just these convoluted messes of roads that if you make one wrong turn off, you're pretty much screwed. And this short was really intended to be a one-shot, and if you've been following this channel, you can see that Chuck did a lot of these different one-shot cartoons which never really went anywhere. Like Quail One and a few others that just never really exploded into the pop culture, but this one did.
Yes. I wanted to read an excerpt, a quote from Chuck Jones in the book That's All Folks, The Art of Warner Brothers Animation by Steve Schneider, where there's a quote from Chuck Jones that says about the origin of this cartoon. He says, "It began as a parody and ended as a paradigm. Like much else in the Roadrunner series, plans just happened to backfire. Mike and I," that's Mike Maltese, "thought it would be funny to do a parody of chase cartoons," referring to writer Michael Maltese because everybody was always chasing everybody else. Dogs chasing cats, cats chasing mice. Then we would become the Dean Swifts of our day. I don't know who he's referencing there, but there you go. So as Mike said, we've tried things like an anteater chasing a dugong, a giraffe chasing a snail, things like that. But we realize that there's logic at work in chases like cats and mice. They're natural adversaries, so you don't have to establish their motivations. So we tried to find a more logical chase. I came up with coyotes because I had read Mark Twain's Roughing It when I was a kid, and he had a whole chapter on coyotes, what the kind of person the coyote actually is. And he also has a chapter on jackrabbits in which he gives a description of their speed. That's what gave me the clue to the speed of the Roadrunner. I thought of Roadrunners, they're all over Southern California, and then I remembered how fast Twain said a jackrabbit is. The Roadrunners seem funny anyway, a bird that runs. They're like flying fish of the land. There you go.
Also, the Meep Meep, or Beep Beep, whichever you want to call it, some say Meep Meep, some say Beep Beep, voice done by Paul Julian, and he was a background artist at the studio at the time, and that ended up being recorded by Treg Brown, who was, of course, does all the sound effects and whatnot at the studio. And I've also learned that it's actually still being used in Warner Brothers media today. Like, you would think they would have maybe re-recorded it in maybe higher fidelity or whatever, but no, it's still being used today, that blows my mind, actually. I thought it was just incredible.
No, and occasionally you'll hear a bit of modern media that doesn't use that original recording, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. Like Mel Blanc actually did a couple of meep meep beep beep, whatever you call it, for a couple of things like back in the 70s or something, and you hear it and it's like, no, that's not right. And you hear the remastered recordings of the actual Paul Julian, and it was only 1 or 2 sessions, I think. Paul Julian wasn't even in Chuck Jones' unit. He was a background painter for Friz Freleng and left the studio shortly thereafter to go to UPA, actually, where he actually became a director. A very good one at that. He used to apparently carry these armloads of drawings and backgrounds and stuff, and to get people to get out of his way in a hallway, he would go meep 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 meep, like a forklift backing up or something, and that's where that idea came from. And I actually, in one of Jones's books here that I'm looking at, which is called Chuck Jones Chuck Redux, he talks about that. Y'all talk while I look this up here.
Of course. And I do want to mention that if you actually want to hear an older Paul Julian do the voice, because Michael Barrio interviewed him and there is a audio recording of Paul Julian within that commentary, which I do highly encourage you to listen to. So while Matt is looking for the part of the book, Matty, you love this cartoon, but probably for a different reason than what people might expect. What was the one thing that stood out to you in this cartoon?
Okay, so I'm going to have a little tiny bit of a controversial take. I've said it in other commentaries, but I was never the biggest fan of the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote series. I guess because of the repetitiveness of it. But now I'm older. Now I know more about the history and the production of these cartoons. And rewatching this cartoon, it is an incredible cartoon. It's hilarious. I see why this series lasted so long. I mean, minus the ones from the 60s. And it's cool to see how fully formed these characters were from the get-go. But as you were saying before in particular, I just love how this cartoon established one of the signature songs of these two characters. I mean, when you think of Bugs Bunny, you think of What's Up, Doc, the song that Carl Stalling wrote specifically for the character. For Tweety, I taught a putty tat, or I'm a tweet little bird in a dill, the cage, or whatever it may be. But it's funny how for the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote that their theme song, so to speak, is actually from a Czech opera called The Bartered Bride. And it's kind of a drag. I have a master's degree in vocal performance. And the university that I did my master's at, the University of Houston, is about to stage a production of this very same opera, The Bartered Bride, in English, not in Czech, next week. So it's a drag. I wasn't there to perform it. Because when I found out right when I was graduating that my university was going to do The Bartered Bride, I start going, ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da. So what am I singing in particular? I'm singing The Dance of the Comedians, which is something that occurs in the third act of the opera. It's a comedic opera. And I listened to the recording of how to pronounce his name multiple times, and I'm still going to screw it up because I've never sung in Czech. I've never spoken Czech. But Better Zik Smetana. I thought it was Smetana, but Smetana, he's written other compositions. His most famous one is the Moldau, but also The Bartered Bride. Again, roast me in the comments for my horrible pronunciations of Czech. But yeah, this opera in particular, it's definitely the most well-known Czech opera, and it helped to establish that particular style of music. But yeah, in the third act of the opera, you see a bunch of characters like a circus coming by, and the orchestra starts playing The Dance of the Comedians. Bum, bum, ba, bum, 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 and you start hearing that in the very beginning when the Roadrunner is running down and he knocks over the credits, which I thought was really clever. And then once you see our wonderful, desperate Wile E. Coyote, who hasn't got his voice yet, that'll be another few years from now. But that's when you start hearing the other theme of The Dance of the Comedians. And every time I hear that, I don't think of the opera. I think of, these two characters. And one other scene that I believe you spoke about before, but and I mentioned this in the previous commentary we recorded, but as an adult, now that, I'm older, I know a lot more, and especially about music, that I have a whole new layer of appreciation for these cartoons because I'm getting a lot of the musical puns that Carl Stalling put in these cartoons. And in particular, the scene where the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, after he got his amazing super-powered sneakers that I wish I had when I do Spartan races, so I don't feel like I'm dying when I'm doing them. But
Yeah.
when they're chasing each other and you hear, I'm looking over four-leaf clover, which, of course, Carl Stalling has used before. That was a piece written in 1927 by Mort Dixon, wrote the words, and Harry Woods did the music itself. And it was already a well-known song because obviously it's older than the cartoon, but I was looking up a little more. It was actually revived in the year before the cartoon's release. Cartoon came out in 1949, but in 1948, there was a bunch of different versions of this song that came out, like I believe 5 or 6 that were recorded that year. The most famous version was from Art Mooney, and it actually topped the charts during that year. But a few weeks ago for St. Patrick's Day, I'm talking about leprechauns and traditional Irish music and Celtic music and stuff of that nature. But I specifically showed that scene of the four-leaf clover or the clover leaf hiring. And then I played the recording that Art Mooney did in 1948. And I'm like, do you notice anything particular? And some of the people caught on. They're like, oh, it's the same melody. I was like, yes. And then when they realized, I'm like, why is it being played there? I don't see any leprechauns. I don't see any green or whatever. And then they're like, oh, because the highway is shaped like a clover leaf. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and it's just
Yeah.
and it's just stuff like that where I could randomly laugh at a cartoon because I hear the Carl Stalling cue and I burst into laughter because I'm like, I get the joke.
Yeah. And that's why these were called Looney Tunes, Tunes, like music, and Merry Melodies, because even before, even after they were required to feature a Warner Brothers owned song, which was originally the idea, Carl Stalling continued that, and he was like, oh, well, I can feature Warner Brothers songs, I can feature public domain music, I could feature classical, whatever I want to do. And he was in on the joke the whole time. You hear that, like that Four-Leaf Clover song. The song goes like, I'm looking over a four-leaf clover that I overlooked before. But in the arrangement that he does, it's like literally Fast and Furious. It's like, brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant. And then the theme song that you were talking about by the Czech composer, I thought it was in one of these books of Chuck Jones, and I was looking for it and I couldn't find it, but he thought, Chuck Jones anyway, with Carl Stalling, he thought it sounded like the Bartered Bride sounded like the Battered Bird. And so he thought that was a good choice. And if it was not true, it's something that Chuck Jones would have come up with. The excerpt in Chuck Jones' book, Chuck Jones' Chuck Redux, he talks about the beep beep of Paul Julian. He says the Roadrunner's immortal beep beep was an accidental find inspired by the sound Paul Julian made as he blindly tried to clear a route for himself along Termite Terrace corridor. It seemed unimaginable to ask anybody but Paul to record this sound, so we invited him into the studio, and it is his voice that is heard in every Roadrunner cartoon, although Mel Blanc is given credit for it. Paul would have made a fortune if he had belonged to the Screen Actors Guild.
Mm.
There we are.
What a drag.
Yeah. But one thing I want to point out about Cole Starling that you got, because you guys were talking about him, that I noticed, because he did scores for silent movies, so he would be playing music for him. And I think a lot of that is just that experience of doing that all the time that just led itself so well to him when he finally went and composed to, well, of course, he did Disney first with the Silly Symphonies, and then he went to a few other places, I believe, and then he went over to Warner's in the mid to late 30s. But it's amazing that as a composer, he could just very much play it like a silent movie and call it a day, but he goes that one step further and just adds all these extra puns and stuff, which I think is absolutely incredible.
That's what made him so great.
Exactly.
Another thing we need to point out is that not only were there mistakes made when this cartoon was restored by Warner Brothers in the last, 20 years, it's been restored 2 or 3 times in that period. We talk about, there's this technique that digital restoration people use called DNR, which is digital noise removal, I guess you'd call it.
Or reduction.
And reduction. Okay, removal, reduction, whatever. It ends up in removal is what happens.
Bingo.
And what happened is the initial DVD release back in like 2003, whenever the first Golden Collection came out, that got it pretty much right. Like, it didn't screw the cartoon up, but, you know, if you look at the advance of technology, now we have HD, you can make it look better. So they redid it. Somewhere along the line, they redid it twice. One of them, the color was weird, and the other one, the DNR was so bad that it erases parts of the Coyote and Roadrunner. The version that you see in HD on HBO Max is probably the best version I've seen so far, but it's still got some DNR on that thing. And you wonder, like, oh, there are outlines missing from these characters, and it's because of that. And then you look some more. Because I was looking at that, I was like, okay, which version is the worst? Because we had to talk about that. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Is this digital or is this real? There is a real animation mistake in this cartoon. Did you know that?
Chuck Jones never made a mistake. You lie. You lie.
No. There is an actual mistake. I don't know how it happened. It was probably during the filming, like under camera filming, once they had all the cells painted and everything. In the scene where Wile E. Coyote is tossing the boomerang in his hand when he's about to throw a boomerang at the Roadrunner. Anthony, you know about boomerangs, don't you?
Nah.
You Aussie.
No, nothing about boomerangs.
You don't know nothing about boomerangs, mate? Come on now.
You're throwing stickers boomerang back on us. That's Simpsons reference.
All right, well, it's all coming back to you, right? But no, there's a scene where the Coyote is tossing a boomerang in his hand, and his tail keeps disappearing, like every other frame. And if you look at it, you see that in HD. You did not see that on the old murky, VHS tape that I had. When I grew up, I had it on tape. It was actually on an official tape of Roadrunner cartoons that I had. I never noticed that, but in HD, it's very apparent that every other frame, his tail disappears. I don't know why. I don't know what precipitated that at all.
Sure, but
precipitated
it seems to be correct, for sure. But of course, there's a reason that this cartoon launched a series. And that is also incredibly funny. So, of course, we've spoken about the origins of the series, the music, but let's talk about the gags. I mean, probably everyone's favorite bit, of course. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all have our favorite gags from this particular short. So I'll start off with what my favorite gag is and perhaps a runner-up. See, my favorite one is the school crossing, involving the cross-dressing of the Coyote, and then not because it's got a great topper, because not only you see the Roadrunner, of course, dressed up, cross-dressing as well, but also Roadrunners can't read. I've always gotten a kick out of that. I mean, if you can't read, how did you write that sign? I think it's absolutely hilarious. I've always liked, and yes, they reused some of these gags again and again because you're going to do so much, but I got a kick out of it. But here's my runner-up, the Superman gag. See, that gag just slays me all the time, because how for a super genius, as this will be established later, where did he get the bright idea that wearing this Superman suit was going to help him fly? I mean, there's nothing on the box that suggests that this was going to...
Right.
I can understand if the box said, rocket-propelled Superman suit or something. I can understand that, but no, this just looks like a costume. Like if you were to go to the local store, buy a costume and just jump off a cliff, which I'm not saying to do, but that's what he does here. So those are my two favorite gags, although I will say it was actually tough to narrow it to those two, because the gags here, both short and long, are impeccable. Mm-hmm. We'll start with you, Manny. What was your favorite gag, and perhaps a runner-up if you have one?
I'm actually looking at it right now. Because I was like, there's a lot to choose from.
It's hard, isn't it, for this one? It's good.
It's really hard. Yeah, as I've gotten older, I'm like, you know what? Don't sleep on these cartoons. They've held up for a reason. Or like people are like, my favorite character is the Roadrunner. I'm like, doesn't really do much, but I'm like, I just remember, think of all the stupidity that the Wile E. Coyote gets to
for such a super genius.
He's such a genius, super genius. Probably my favorite one is that whole scene with the Cloverleaf Highway gag, because musically it just kills me every time.
Of course.
But I think a close second has to be the whole refrigerator meat grinder contraption that and the
Yes.
skis that Wile E uses. But I was just when you were like, Manny, go ahead. I started laughing because the expression has on his face as as the refrigerator motor starts failing, and how his eyes just keep shrinking, and his like eyes turn almost completely red. I wish
Well,
I knew who animated that scene, because his face of like, oh man, I
Absolute
screwed up.
dread. Yeah.
And of course, Merry Christmas at the end, and you hear Carl Stalling quoting Jingle Bells. Gets me every single time.
Treg Brown, who was the sound effects wizard for these cartoons, the thing with the combination of him and Carl Stalling, where it's jingle bells and then the jingle bells kind of starts to trail off, and then Treg Brown has this kind of putting engine failing. It's like
It's so good.
And just as the engine sound starts to sound like it's failing, then Wile E. Coyote, he has this kind of sinking expression, like he knows what's going to happen. It's like, and then he falls. I love the timing of it. It's perfect. The whole cartoon, y'all did a video about the 100 greatest Looney Tunes, and you were like, well, this isn't one of them. I think it is. I think it's perfect. I think it's just a perfect cartoon. And
Wait, did we say
if
this
you
one
ask
didn't
me-
belong?
No,
No,
you didn't say it didn't belong. You just said it wasn't perfect. And I'm like, I think it is
Oh,
perfect.
okay.
Personally.
Okay.
But anyway, my favorite gag is the tunnel, okay?
Yes, the classic tunnel.
Because
Yes,
it's just
classic tunnel.
it was done again once or twice in Jones cartoons, but it was never done as well here. Where Wile E. Coyote paints the tunnel and tries to trick the Roadrunner into running into a stone cliff. Okay, and the Roadrunner runs through it, no problem. But when the Coyote tries to run through it, he crashes into it because it's a stone wall. There is no logic to it except cartoon logic. You know, Roadrunner can run through a stone wall, Coyote can't. And I just think that's hilarious. I don't know why it is. I just think it's funny.
And it has a great topper. It has the great
Yeah.
topper where of the Roadrunner running back through the tunnel. I think that made the gag go
Yes.
from great to
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And they even riffed off on that in Roger Rabbit, like years later. The Disney Richard Williams, of course, everybody knows Who Framed Roger Rabbit, great movie.
Absolute classic.
They did a similar gag in that movie. Like that's a timeless joke that I think, unless it originated in silent comedy, and it probably did, it was probably something that Jones saw as a kid or something and liked, but that's what people know it for. And there's actually a meme that goes around Facebook. I see it all the time. It's like, Wile E. Coyote is remembered for his violence when he really should be remembered for his brilliant paintings of tunnels.
Exactly right. Any other gags? Any runner-up gag for you there?
Honestly, the clover leaf, the highway gag, just jet-propelled tennis shoes with the four-leaf clover and the music, like that's perfect. That's great. I love that.
I also like the map, the blueprint, I should say. That blueprint, it's weird for someone who paints these tunnels so well, and yet if you look at the blueprint, it's just so simple. It's the stick figures of the, which I'm proud of. But it's like, cool out Keystone, Rock Falls, Roadrunner, then step 4, Roadrunner crushed. Ha ha. I just love the extra touch to ha ha.
Well, and if Anthony, we talked about this earlier, that video game that we talked about that I grew up with in the 90s called Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally for the Super Nintendo. That used that gag, almost the exact same animation where you see the Coyote pull up his blueprint and it's all stick figures in white on blue paper, and then you have to fight the boss, which is, you're the Roadrunner, the boss is the Coyote, and you have to fight it based on the blueprint. The blueprint gives you clues. Just great. And, but it was inspired by that cartoon, the first Roadrunner.
Mm-hmm. There was something else I've realized with what Chuck Jones said about how, if you put a cat and mouse together, you automatically know what's going to happen in terms of a chase cartoon, but you got here Coyote and Roadrunner, and I think the way they establish it so well is the use of those fake Latin titles, because it establishes, here's the protagonist, here's the antagonist, and here you go, here's the chase, go on. So, Accelerati Incredibus of that one for the Roadrunner in this one, and of course Carnivorous vulgaris for the Coyote in this one. I like how it changes for every single one, when in real life, pretty much once a living organism gets its Latin name, it pretty much stays the same. But
Yeah.
just to slowly wrap this one up, we need to go through the scores. I mean, I'm giving it a 10 anyway, because it is a masterpiece of comedic timing. Of course, the music, as you guys mentioned, it's a 10. It's a great cartoon. Rewatching it again, I just think it's just magnificent.
No, I agree. 10 out of 10. Masterpiece.
And Manny, are you going to be the contrarian, like in the Olympics, how you usually have two people doing perfect scores and you got the other one saying 9.5 or something?
Don't do this to me. Maybe I should deduct points for the DNR. I mean, I sure hope somebody got fired for that blunder. To hell with it. I'll give it a 10 out of 10. It's hilarious. It's given me, as rewatching this again, it's like they blur after a while, but one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that in some ways I actually kind of like this earlier design of the two characters. There's something about how they they're pretty much almost fully formed, but I don't know. There's certain drawings of Wile E. Coyote in this cartoon that I think are more appealing than later versions. But whatever. With that being said, yeah, the cartoon fires in all cylinders.
Yeah,
10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I know I sound a little different from my opinion from the 100 greatest ones, but I did another rewatch and I'm like, yeah, this holds up incredibly well. Bravo.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. If you're not going to give a 10 to something, I mean, if this doesn't get a 10, then what does? That's what I say. So
yeah, it established a series of nearly 30 really great cartoons, and then after that, there were some that weren't so great, but they weren't by Chuck Jones, so you could say, okay, you still got 30 great cartoons out of it. So
exactly, and I'll make sure you come back for the Solid Tin Coyote and those ones, okay? I'll make sure of that.
I like that one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I like that cartoon.
Gasp. I thought there was sacrilege.
Sorry.
You know, you might have to...
I like that one.
you might...
It's one of the only ones by that director that I like. I like that cartoon. I think it's great. No, it's badly animated. The music sucks, but it's entertaining. I like it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you'll be now shunned from the animation community, I guess, from that saying, it's like, I cast thee out.
Well, maybe cut that out and save that reveal for when we actually talk about that cartoon, which will probably be like 2 years from now, anyway.
So at the rate I'm going, probably 5 years. But anyway, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and until next time, take care. Beep beep.
Meep, 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 meep.
Beep beep.